locally. So welcome everyone. This is a 911 Advisory Task Force Lunch and Learn on April 28th on the topic of public safety answering point consolidation, which is a very wide topic. It's sometimes is a topic that is scary to people. The reason we're having this is simply because I've gotten some questions lately about consolidation. We've had some consolidation of PSAPs in the last couple of years. And I just want people to have all the resources they need if they're thinking about any sort of consolidation, whether it's physical consolidation or virtual consolidation in their 911 centers. There are a number of reasons why a 911 center might look at some form of consolidation, whether it's the traditional kind of everybody moving into one building together and working from one staff, or other types of consolidation. And some of those reasons are fiscal. They're financial. If you are trying to run a 911 center on a very limited budget, sometimes the economies of scale make that very difficult. But if you combine financial resources with a neighbor, sometimes it makes it a little bit easier to run a larger center for a larger area and a larger set of population, with also, I might add, a larger subscriber base, since our funding here in Colorado is local. And then there are other reasons too, such as improved coordination and collaboration between agencies. Sometimes that can be facilitated by either a physical consolidation or a virtual consolidation, where you're sharing equipment and can therefore share 911 calls back and forth, or share CAD records back and forth. And at least on 911 calls, we have several examples of that in Colorado, where 911 centers are sharing 911 equipment and are therefore better able to back each other up if they need it, which you might not think of that as consolidation, but it is a form of consolidation. So with that in mind, I have brought together a very esteemed group of subject matter experts from different firms across the country who work on these types of issues. So I'm going to give a brief introduction, and then I'm going to let each of them introduce themselves in more detail. So we have, and let me check, has Eric joined yet? Eric Perry from Federal Engineering. Eric was also in the position of going to be trying to do this from the Navigator conference, which may also be one of the reasons why we don't have as big of a turnout today as we usually do, but we have 33 people on the call, which isn't bad. So we'll skip Eric for now. Maybe he'll be able to join us later, but we also have Carrie Schrock from MTM, Tom Moreau from Winborn, Bonnie Maney from Mission Critical Partners. So we'll start with Carrie. If you want to introduce yourself, and then we can just kind of go down the list.
Yes, absolutely. Good morning, good afternoon. I'm Carrie Schrock with the MTM Solutions, and I am local in the Northwest New Mexico area, so not too far from the Colorado border. Matter of fact, I have property down in Mancos, and so I'm in Colorado quite a bit, but I don't travel, too far north. I'm a consultant mostly for tribal entities. I work my biggest, I would say client, but the biggest partnership that I have is with the Navajo Nation, and then a couple of smaller tribes out in Arizona. And so I help with consolidation, consulting or training, policy revision, just really trying to bring our tribal partners up to kind of a higher level of standard for their dispatchers. They're amazing, wonderful people. I see maybe some familiar faces. I've been in the industry for, I would say, 18 years now. I was at a consolidated PSAP in New Mexico for almost 16 years before branching off to do kind of the private sector. So I appreciate you, Daryl, for inviting me, and I'm excited to visit with everybody and just get to know you.
Oh, and I should also mention too that I had the pleasure of working with Carrie over a decade ago now. It hardly seems like it's been that long, but it's been a long time. When I was a PSAP manager in Northwest New Mexico. So we have that background.
Daryl was my boss.
Hopefully not a terrible one, but I think I'm probably better now. Tom, our next panelist is Tom Moreau with Winborn Consulting. Tom?
Good afternoon, everybody. Tom Moreau, Winborn Consulting. Real quick background, I'm 27 years retired law enforcement division commander. I was also the CIO over public safety, police, fire, EMS, emergency management, operations, and technology systems. PSAP director for many years. Been consulting for more than 15 years. The company's out of the Washington, D.C. area, but we're national and international. Completed projects in New York City, Los Angeles, Boston, Miami, Milwaukee, up Colorado, name it. Completed numerous PSAP consolidation projects and everything to do with public safety and PSAPs. Glad to be here.
Great. And then Bonnie Maney, am I pronouncing that correctly, Bonnie, with Mission Critical Partners?
Yep, you got it. So thank you, Daryl. Just like Carrie said, really happy to be here. My name is Bonnie Maney. I work for Mission Critical Partners, MCP, commonly known. We are a public safety communications consulting and lifecycle management services firm. You may recently, those that are familiar with us, we also, in addition to our public safety consulting division, we also have a lot of work in the justice space and have recently acquired a couple of firms that have put us more into the data integration and cybersecurity as well, for a really holistic view of public safety and justice end to end, from call origination through to the justice aspect as well. On our consulting division side, which is where I reside primarily, about 40% of our staff on the consulting division side, which is, I think we have about over 200 staff firm-wide right now, but about 40% on our consulting side have public safety practitioner experience. A few are in that 10-year range, but most folks have 10, 20, 30 years plus as a practitioner, whether it be in the PSAP or as a field responder for police, fire, or EMS. So myself, 20 years, and then I'm in my 32nd year overall. We do projects nationwide. Our staff live nationwide as well. And we have had the, extreme pleasure of working with a lot of you folks in Colorado. Like Carrie, I recognize several names on the list. So nice to see you all. Daryl, thank you for bringing this together. And we hope that you all can take away a few nuggets, hopefully, of information today.
And get myself unmuted. Great, thank you very much. And I'll try one more time. I do not see him on the attendee list, but is Eric Perry of it? Has he been able to join yet? That's okay. We'll still have a very good panel because we've got some really good experts here. And I just want to mention too, before we get into the panel discussion, that I've been through 2 different PSAP consolidations myself when I was still working in PSAPs. Actually 3, if we want to be technical about it. So when I was in Springfield, Missouri, we consolidated the county and city agencies into one public safety answering point. And then I worked in Wisconsin for a little over a year, and I went there actually to be part of a consolidation project where we consolidated 3 PSAPs into one. And then in New Mexico, we consolidated the State Patrol into our PSAP. I think they eventually consolidated out again. So sometimes that happens as well, but that was part of the experience there. So I've been part of it as a telecommunicator, as a supervisor, and as a PSAP manager. I've been involved in those types of moves. As I know a lot of you who are listening today have been part of those as well. So with that, I would like to go ahead and get started with our questions. We scheduled an hour and a half today. So hopefully we have time for questions at the end, so audience questions. But I also want to, if somebody has a question that they want to go ahead and raise while we're going through the discussion, I think it makes for better conversation. So if you have a question that you don't want to save for the end, feel free to go ahead and ask it while we're going through this. Please use the raise hand feature, and then we'll go from there. So the first question I have is what are some of the potential benefits and drawbacks of consolidation? I was going to throw this one first to Eric, but since he's not here, we'll go with Carrie. Carrie, if you want to start off with that, and then we'll have the other panelists weigh in.
Yes, and so the point that I'm going to make on this, because there's so many benefits and drawbacks, I have a hard time really, articulating just because I see so many benefits to it. But the one that I'm going to specifically speak on is the teamwork aspect. And the reason that this is what comes to mind is personally working in a consolidated PSAP when we did have our high school shooting. The comment that was made from an EMD director or EMD instructor that was in our comm center, he was actually teaching that week while we had that incident. So when I came back, I was a tactical dispatcher on scene, but when I came back in the next day, his comment was, this place was one well-oiled machine. And just, really what it was is the dispatcher received a lot of praise on her communication and everything she did. And she would tell people, it was this team behind me that made me look good. And so the team aspect, of course, there's, funding and there's so many good benefits, but from the one that stands above for me is being able to not be there by yourself. We can only do so much at a time. And so when I see PSAPs that have one, maybe two dispatchers on a shift, my heart breaks because the day and age we're living in, it's really not a matter of if, it's a matter of when a critical incident of some type happens. Maybe not to that severity, but it's just for the people aspect and helping those dispatchers get through those incidents, to have a team just for breaks, just for, duty share, and then the span of control, keeping track of responders. That would be my biggest, I guess, shout out for a positive benefit for consolidation.
Thank you, Carrie. Tom or Bonnie, anything you'd like to add?
Just real quick, I agree with everything Carrie said. We would always ask our customers, anybody to think about that. If you remove the politics, the egos, and those kinds of things, and you were tasked with designing a public safety operation, your PSAP communications for police, fire, EMS, emergency management, 911 today, clean slate, ground up, and you were looking for maximum operational effectiveness, time efficiency, cost effectiveness. Remember, this is a life critical operation along with some mission critical things. Quality of your systems, 911, radio, CAD, mobile, public safety, GIS, logging, recording. Would you do it the same today as your jurisdiction set up? If you were totally clean slate and tasked with just creating the best PSAP system, would you do it the same today? A lot of them people would say no. They do realize, as Daryl said in the beginning, as Gary said, tremendous number of benefits to consolidating. It's really not the benefits that get in the way. It is the drawbacks, and so just address that real quick. By far, the number one drawback is, and I'm going to just talk about things that prohibit it, is really just the politics and egos. People don't want to give up their fiefdom, their power, their position. Some have legitimate concerns. They don't want to lose control. They don't. They want to know what is going to be the quality of that service. If 5 of us go together for one PSAP, how do we make sure we're going to get great quality services for everybody? Nobody's going to get favored. We're all going to get treated equally. Those can be accomplished in what's called service level agreements and contract agreements and those kinds of things. And then also and I would tell you the other things is the initial cost. Sometimes they get sticker shock. You're going to combine numerous agencies into one PSAP. You might need a new CAD system. Might need a new or an upgraded 911, or upgrade your radio or logging recording. So normally, sometimes the initial cost of consolidating can give people sticker shock. But we would tell you over time is where you get that return on investment. Economies of scale is you'll save money over time.
Thank you, Tom. Bonnie?
Yeah, I mean, can't disagree with anything that Carrie and Tom say. I mean, folks on the call, you guys probably have heard this. If the four-letter word consolidation has ever come up. But, I would add to that one of our biggest, and we know this, and I know you guys are feeling this, the staffing situation right now. And it's been a historically persistent situation. It's really amplified at the moment. But one of the biggest advantages to consolidation, and it doesn't have to be physical. I kind of try to use an analogy that, it's not our grandmother's version of consolidation anymore, where we're supposed to be all in one room singing Kumbaya. It's more like Baskin Robbins. There's, 32 different flavors today. And to whatever that looks like to do, one of the biggest advantages, though, is eliminating recruiting and hiring competition in your region. However that can look. There are all different types of, again, consolidation. So if it's from a policy perspective, but when it comes to it, basically right now, let's say there's 4 PSAPs in an area, in a county, you're all competing for that same resource pool of staff. If you can consolidate, you now eliminate all of that competition, and you can work together on one very cohesive, team-oriented situational awareness environment.
Thank you, Bonnie. I did see a chat come in from Mandy Stolzheimer from Western Regional Dispatch Center in Montrose. Mandy says physical consolidation can actually hinder recruitment and add to staffing shortages. Mandy, I don't know if you're able to talk right now, but if you can you explain what you mean by that so the panel can respond?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'd like to jump in here as a consolidated center, and having gone through multiple consolidations myself through my career. I always thought that consolidation actually was always a benefit when it came to staffing and recruiting, just as you were saying, Carrie. However, our experience is the opposite in more rural communities. So that staffing benefits are seen in areas where the population base can support it. However, in rural communities, what you're looking at is organizations that want to have some sort of cost savings. So consolidation provides them that. However, now you've established larger organizations that need more people, but often you're only pulling from one community or one population base, but serving multiple population bases with no or limited population base to pull for recruitment. And then on the retention side of it, you get those same sort of issues because you aren't recruiting, attracting new candidates into the workforce. The ones that you have in all situations get overworked. And so I'm really cautious, particularly when people come to my organization with questions about bringing, receiving services from us and expanding our service footprint. I'm really cautious because I worry that I won't be able to recruit and retain enough people to provide those services. So that is a little bit of a double-edged sword when it comes to physical consolidation. However, virtual consolidations help eliminate that constraint.
Daryl, since I'm the one that brought up the eliminating recruiting competition, Mandy, you're 100% right, and that's why the physical consolidation it's not necessarily the way anymore, right? And you need to be able to broaden that resource pool, and even from in some areas that we've been working with, trying to more from a policy perspective, even instead of coming together in one physical center, from a policy and collaborative perspective, just join forces even into recruiting, such as with a common application. So a person doesn't have to apply at 4 different centers, they can apply in one pool. Now, does that take cooperation and trying to figure out some ways to, work that through, again, politics and such? But it actually it is showing to be effective in some areas. Again, not everybody has such different demographics, politics, things like that. There's so much to take into consideration. But you're spot on with that. And some of these centers are just put, originally in locations that make it really, really hard to recruit.
These are very good points. So Mandy, I think if people don't understand what you're getting at, I think, it's a matter of if you have one PSAP is serving a larger area, but that population is still very spread out, then your recruiting would require potentially people to commute in quite a ways for employment at the PSAP. Is that basically what you're getting at?
That's true. So in our case, we service areas that are literally 2.5 hours away from our physical location of our PSAP. However, we cannot recruit staff who live 2.5 hours away because that commute's unreasonable. And
Right.
so again, it limits our recruitment efforts to our physical proximity, knowing that we're serving a greater and greater geographic area with more and more need for staff.
And so what Bonnie was suggesting is the one approach to that. Of course, it's easier to say in advance than after the fact. But PSAP might consolidate different facilities technologically where they can share technology and share calls either through shared or hosted technological solutions while maintaining those separate facilities so that it's not such a long commute for potential new hires.
Daryl, could I add a point in?
Sure.
Yeah, what Mandy identified too is almost, and not saying that they did that, but we see a lot of consolidation failures because their number one driver was to save money. They were going on the cheap. That's all they cared about, was saving money. And so we would tell you that a consolidation plan, a good one, has to have what's called total cost of ownership. Every single aspect of that consolidation, initial and recurring costs, must be identified. And also, what is that performance? What are you looking to get out of that? How are you going to measure the success of that? And that includes, as Manny was saying, your staffing. When you identify those areas, you're looking for all the risks, those potential solutions, and in her case, that rural staffing issue has to be part of that plan. As you just said, I can have a call center 60, 70 miles away. I can have two different call centers. Doesn't matter where the call takes from. But there are all kinds of, you can have virtual call centers, that kind of stuff now. But absolutely, she was identifying that too many times people don't include that recruitment, retention. What are the salaries? How do I retain those people in the consolidation plan? And that definitely needs to be included.
I would add to that as well, not just recruitment, but as she mentioned, retention, because Bonnie had mentioned location. And so, that as a drawback is something to think about. I'm a huge advocate for the people who are sitting there every day doing this job, and how many are you going to lose because the location for consolidation ended up being further away from their home, or maybe it was, real convenient, yet they, blood, sweat, and tears for that place for 20 some years. And so there's a lot of considerations to take in as well. One of the large projects, we're looking at, that location is a huge factor just because of the size of the Navajo Nation and pulling people, which, in that community, typically people drive for a long, it's kind of a common thing to drive a long ways to work. So it's not a huge shock, but getting down to, what are the dispatchers hearing and trying to alleviate some of their fears. The minute you mention consolidation, the dispatchers working the positions just really start to panic, and they start to think, because this is their life, this is their livelihoods, and it could be their career path there, and so really trying to ease some of those worries with them, but get, their standpoint and hear their voice as well from the bottom up, I think is also, just as important.
Thank you, Carrie. But I think we've kind of transitioned into the next question already, but I'll go ahead and ask it separately. What are some of the concerns that you hear most from agencies considering consolidation, but are maybe hesitant? And this time we'll start with Tom.
Yeah, so as we started, the concerns are always upfront control is governance. It's what is that governance structure? Who has the final decision-making authority, conflict resolution, budget, funding decisions, operational decisions. Those are resolved through a good governance structure. You can have an executive oversight committee, a management oversight committee, a technical committee, an operations committee, police, fire, and EMS committees, dispatch, call taker committees. And as long as those are all documented and you have very good service level agreements, SLAs, they can be alleviated. But you have to get everybody in the room, on the table, being very direct, because that's a number one concern. Second from that is funding. Is that almost all of these require an initial cost. So how is it going to be funded? What is that cost sharing model? I'm a large agency. They're a small agency. The small agencies, well, I don't want to pay as much as a large agency. So what is that cost breakdown? And as I think Bonnie said earlier, there's 32 different flavors, all kinds of cost sharing models out there. And there's kind of no right or wrong. It's what's best for the community. And the last thing I would say, to hand it off to the other two, is that it's really the parity of staffing. When you consolidate, if I bring all these different groups together, they're all starting at different wages. Some people are making X an hour, other call takers are making X an hour. And there is no silver bullet. There's no unicorn that's going to automatically make them all making the same amount of money on day one. Generally, that's accomplished over some years and through attrition. And people just have to understand that in many consolidation, it is reality. One call taker is making $2 more an hour than another for a period of time. It's just jurisdictions don't have unlimited checkbooks to just get everybody even. The goal is to eventually get them there and to have a plan, but a lot of times that can't happen on day one.
Thank you, Tom. Carrie or Bonnie? Anything to add?
So to build off of Tom and looking at Mandy's chat comment too, I'm gonna go back to staff. Sure, politics arise from your elected officials. Politics arise from command and control and who's sandbox, just like Tom said. But you can also take any consolidation efforts if you don't have that human resource element, that staff element addressed. I know Carrie kind of mentioned this in the last one as well. And people are worried that they're going to lose their jobs. They're going to lose their position. What's my vacation, bidding seniority going to be? What's my shift seniority going to be? And how's that going to work? And I mean, a lot of times if you don't feed that animal, it's going to start thinking of all the worst conspiracy, theories out there. And our experience there is, open, honest dialogue, as just as important as an implementation plan, and that all those elements and the total cost of ownership is detailing out very specifically all these human resource elements. What are the pay ranges at each agency? What are they ultimately going to be? What's going to be agreed on? What are the benefits? How's the seniority going to work? And detailing all of that out so it is transparent and the staff know what to expect. It's something that needs to be done as early on in these efforts and in these initiatives as possible, because they are your most important element in taking care of the people that are going to be not just operating the center, but are going to have to execute on any of the new policies or procedures and systems that are in place.
And Bonnie, before I pass it on to Carrie, I think you triggered a thought for me, which is whether we know it or not, I think in 911, whether we're cognizant of this or not, we hire people to be pessimistic to a slight degree, because we want them to be able to think, okay, what are the ways that this 911 call can go bad? How do I prepare? If this happens, what do I do next? So they have to be a little pessimistic. They have to be able to think about worst case scenarios. And, when it comes to things like this, sometimes that imagination that we hire them for can also be a detriment, because then they start thinking, okay, how is this consolidation going to negatively impact me, instead of thinking of the ways that it might positively impact. So that just,
Daryl, so true, so true. And we tend to focus more as individuals on what there is to lose rather than what there is to gain. And trying to flip that conversation to that. And I don't know, Carrie and Tom, if you can, but I can say confidently from our perspective, there has not been one consolidation feasibility study or implementation we've done where we have suggested you need to eliminate positions. Usually everybody's so understaffed as it is that everybody has a role. Should they be a good quality A-player candidate, right? And so, just trying to, and they don't know us as consultants, they don't know us from Adam, and so trying to get that trust with them to say, no, you can believe us. Here's the numbers, here's the data to show that you'll have a role in this organization.
thank you, Bonnie. Carrie, anything to add?
Yes, on top of everything they said, definitely, again, being the advocate for the people. What I hear mostly is, I wouldn't say mostly, but just, in addition to all of that, is the concern from a technical standpoint, because with your smaller PSAPs, a lot of the ones I've had experience with barely have a CAD system. A lot of them are still writing, picking up that handset. I have one agency that did not even have a bathroom. And so I actually bought and sold them a bathroom facility. And so I'm, in some situations, I look at it from zero to hero. So you're taking, with limited or minimal technology, and then you're just kind of pushing them into this, just sea of technology all around you. And it scares them sometimes to think, can I keep up with that? Am I going to be able to learn all of this at once? Is my agency going to push me to learn it quickly? Are we going to phase it in? And so those are some of the concerns that I've heard, in addition to the, the control aspect from the leaders, from, entities that maybe they're fire only, and now you're wanting and everybody's just kind of you're wanting my employees to learn police, and so it's just a lot of trying to like Tom had mentioned, just try to get through some of those hurdles and just give people a bit of a piece, and really not try to go full force real fast, just letting them understand this can transition in a way that we can bring you up to speed, introduce new technology, or even if it's like he had mentioned, maybe having to consolidate a CAD system or learn a whole new CAD system. I don't know, how many of you have had to go switch from one CAD to another CAD or upgrade. And I mean, it's a nightmare. Just one technology can be a nightmare sometimes. And so now we're introducing multiple layered upon layered of technologies. And so those are things when it comes to the pre-planning to really keep in mind of letting them, what I did personally was introduced some of these technologies very early and let them play with things and demo things, and just before consolidation even began to happen, just starting to kind of get that mindset of you can do this, and we're going to walk you through it.
Very good. Before I move on to the next question, one of the things that I think a lot of people hear in 911 when it comes to consolidation is the fear over loss of local knowledge. So if you're consolidating, from several smaller neighboring areas into one larger area, and maybe you'd no longer have as many, like Mandy was saying, if you no longer have as many employees from the more rural areas because of that, are you going to lose that local knowledge, and how much of an impact will that have on your ability to provide the highest quality of service? And I think some of that can potentially be mitigated through technology like programming common names in your CAD system, so that if somebody says the old red barn and the dispatcher type or the telecommunicator types in the old red barn, it'll come up with an address, even if they don't know where the old red barn is. But that probably isn't a complete replacement for that local knowledge. And I was wondering if any of our panelists have any other thoughts about ways that concern can be mitigated or addressed, other than just doing your best to make sure that you don't lose any of those original employees who might have that institutional knowledge that they can bring with them to a new consolidated arrangement.
Carrie or Bonnie, want to go first, or?
Go for it, Tom.
Go, Tom.
Yeah, let me just point out too, by the way, this is not just for consolidated environment. A lot of times you call 911 and you get a senior person who knows the jurisdiction very well, and they've got that historical knowledge where the old red barn is, versus a newbie, somebody who just got out of the CTO program, first week on the job, and they're brand new to that area and they have no clue where their old red barn is. Computer-aided dispatch systems, your GIS, doing your GIS to a public safety standard, these should be viewed as knowledge databases. Somebody calls 911, it should make a difference whether that person's been on the phones for 2 weeks or 20 years. That exactly as you described it, there is a whole bunch of alias information, landmark information, all these different types of things that can be programmed into the GIS and CAD systems. And as you mentioned, that is actually what, we have customers that are multiple counties in one PSAP. And that is how what you have to do is you have to leverage the knowledge in all the different jurisdictions, especially going to the different generations. We just did a project for a large city. Each generation called a park a different name. So it's currently called X, baby boomers called it Y, the greatest generation called it Z. And so you really have to go out and leverage all these different groups to get that information into the system. So boy, you're right on it, but those are the kind of concerns that you want everybody to say, why won't this work? And you want to document all those and then do a really good business case on what the solution is. So everybody should absolutely say, why won't this work? Why will this be a problem? Any negative statement at all, and then provide a good business case in return on what that solution can be.
Thank you, Tom. Carrie?
Oh, yeah. So, I have kind of a different outlook on that particular topic because, Daryl, you mentioned that state police had consolidated into the PSAP in San Juan County, New Mexico, and then taken away when the state of New Mexico state police did a larger consolidation. And that was a little hard on us to have them taken away. So that particular consolidation, I had, just a little bit of anxiety over because, even though they had the mapping and the layers, they had all of our GIS layers, some of that just local knowledge, we did have a police officer needing help and they were not able, they sent him to the wrong area because it was a very common, it sounded the same. And, so sometimes you have to really in those situations, training, in a lot of rural areas, for example, where I work with Navajo Nation, there is no addressing. Everything is turn by turn direction, and so we really rely on the people aspect and those dispatchers to say, yeah, I know who is there. Oh, is there a tree in the yard? I know exactly where that's at. So you get real far out sometimes, and love technology, but sometimes technology fails, and so to overcome that, it definitely training is and touring and taking some of those. There's so many things you can do within the PSAP. Some options we used to do is we would go take pictures of these places and create a wall and do where is this kind of game and just, become creative so that you don't take away that just the local knowledge and relying on the ones from that area. If you do have some that, have come over, we always knew who knew this side of the county better than the others and just drawing from them. Unfortunately, with consolidation, you lose people. I mean, and I don't know, I'm only speaking from experience. Tom and Bonnie may have another comment to that, but there have been times that people said A, it's too much technology, I just don't think I can do this, or B, you know, it's not what I want to do for, as far as whether it's location or whatever, but the more you can minimize that and come up with some kind of solution and let them help you with those solutions, let them, you know, ask them. And as some of them mentioned, be transparent and say, this is what we're looking at doing. Here's everything. Give us your input. You know, how would you overcome this? And they can come up with some very, very, very brilliant ideas.
Very good points. Bonnie?
I think, again, Tom and Terry are spot on in that, you know, technology is great until technology doesn't work, or you're in a, you know, in that type of situation. And, you know, the truth is too, that there are just some places that don't even have CAD yet, right? That actually don't even have 911, enhanced 911 for that matter. Those places still do exist in the country. Honestly, not sure in Colorado, Daryl, to be honest, but they do exist. So what can we learn and still understand that sometimes we could be in a disaster situation where we don't have our technology available to us. So with the having to go and back to some just, you know, foundational types of things and have that ride along training, those games training, and have that. Now, with that said, not everybody is going to have that, like you said, coming in, right? Everybody was a new employee at some point, and everybody, you know, they didn't come in with mass amounts of geographical information. So sometimes in these situations, we're also a little harder on each other than we should be thinking. Everybody has to come in like they're a 20-year employee, understanding that we can learn it. It can be learned. It's just going to take time. And that's something in consolidation efforts that is really important, no matter what form of consolidation, is understanding that this stuff is going to take time for everybody how to learn how to work together in this new organizational structure, in this new way of doing things.
Thank you, Bonnie. And I think, you know, Tom, you said something that I think really resonated with me, which is it's not just consolidation that makes this an issue. You know, with our staffing issues right now across the country, and which, you know, we're not immune from here in Colorado. It's not an unforeseeable situation where you might lose one or two of your local knowledge experts, and then what do you do? So, you know, PSAPs really should be planning for this now. If you lose your institutional knowledge experts or your local geography experts, you know, how do you adapt to that? And I think one way is to plan for it and to prepare for it. And like Carrie said, to rely on your subject matter experts for training and to help bring everybody else up to speed. Because as Bonnie said, not everybody is going to have that knowledge just innately when they come in the door the first day. So our next question is, what are some of the unforeseen factors that agencies sometimes encounter once they decide to consolidate? So, you know, I think nobody walks into it blindly. They've all thought through some of these things, but what are some of the things that sometimes agencies didn't foresee and may catch them kind of blindsided once they get started into the process? And for this question, I'm going to start with Bonnie.
Well, interesting enough, one of the things that, you know, you try and do a risk plan, right? You try and manage risk. So you want to understand, you know, what's the impact, what's the ability that this risk is going to come to fruition, and, you know, and how are you going to mitigate it downstream? One of the things is that you might not think about sometimes is, are there any elections coming up of your supporters, right? Those that have all bought into everything. Yes, we're going to go for it. We're going to go, you know, good. And whether it be an unforeseen, unfortunate incident where somebody, you know, a council person or, you know, somebody passes away that was a supporter of this and now they're going to be replaced. Is that person that's replacing them not going to be supporting of this consolidation effort for whatever reason. So making sure that you plan for unexpected, unforeseen situations like that, that can totally derail if you don't think about them up front. What would you do if? Play a lot of what if.
Kind of going back to what I said earlier about how that's what we do in 911 is think about potential worst case scenarios and try to plan for it.
Exactly. It's a different kind of succession planning, more about, project succession planning. But also, again, those that were supporters once you were heading down a path, and then they could become a non-supporter for some reason.
Right. Carrie or Tom, anything to add?
Sure. I think another thing that kind of goes along with supporters, a lot of people forget to, when they start these projects, forget to think about your public. Who is this impact and how do they feel about it? And that was a question that was posed to us in one of our projects was, have you gone to the communities? Because they're going to have concerns as well as, is this going to increase our taxes? How do I call? Especially some of your elderly community or your community with disabilities that are really accustomed to operating a certain way, or they think that consolidation means, I've heard things like in giving public speeches of, oh, I'm gonna have better cell phone service now. It's like, no, it's just a little bit of public education and just kind of trying yet again to eliminate some of those anxieties, but also hear from the public and hear what they have to say about it, letting them have a voice in it as well. I did see in the chat where someone, spoke about a law passed requiring in Illinois to consolidate. And so there was it was kind of a forced thing. And so, with that probably I would imagine caused quite a bit of grief or anxiety throughout all stakeholders. But I would definitely, when you go into it and you're looking at your pre-planning, doing surveys or going to commission meetings and just trying to help build a dialogue that lets the public understand, because things are going to change. Your phone numbers, your administrative numbers, I may have called this 10-digit line my entire life, to get help, and now I'm having to either learn a new number or, learn how to handle 911. As Bonnie mentioned, some entities or some areas don't even have a 911 system. And so the change of administrative numbers seems to be kind of a big deal. People don't want to give up. This has been our, non-emergency number for so long. So whose do we, take now that we're switching areas, and then just some of the unforeseen factors of, handling on the technical side of it, the emergency service numbers and, all of the different transporting and just some of those things that it's all doable in pre-planning, but just making sure that you're engaging the right people from the very beginning, not getting halfway in and then thinking, oh, well, we really didn't think about how this would affect this small community who they call this local fire guy and he just comes over and helps them. Well, the system now says we can't just call the local fire guy. I have to go through this process. How is that going to affect that community?
Thank you, Carrie. Tom, anything to add?
Yeah, just to kind of be real candid, there are many bad PSAP consolidations out there. I mean, we've actually gone in and made recommendations to deconsolidate. Okay, and they all are failed consolidations for legitimate reasons. They did not have their overall strategic objectives. Why are we consolidating? They didn't have a formal governance structure, no formal agreements and roles, responsibilities. They didn't do a comprehensive plan up front. They didn't understand the total cost of ownership. This is a huge one. Actually, Carrie just mentioned it. They didn't have the right people involved. Just it's always astounding where you just have a few people of command staff positions who think they know everything, making all the decisions for everybody. This is a team sport, it does require executive management, but it requires subject matter expertise from the comm center, from police, fire, EMS, emergency management, 911, CAD, GIS, mobile, the operations side. And it's just amazing how many don't include all the right stakeholders up front. They have constraints on what can be talked about. If you're going to do a consolidation, there is no topic that is off limits. Everything should be on the table. Actually, both Bonnie and Gary, and I think Dale said, talk about unforeseen factors. If there are unforeseen factors, that means people didn't do their homework. I mean, literally, people should sit around their room and go, why won't this work? Why will this be a problem? What could happen with this? I mean, they should put their negative hat on and just try and shoot it down. And so I would just say that the main emphasis is that consolidations are complex, and you have to have the right people with the right information, the right team to really do a good job, because there are many failed consolidations out there. So anybody that's considering it, give it its due attention. There's no easy button for PSAP consolidation.
Thank you, Tom. Our next question is, what are some of the benefits of alternate forms of consolidation? For this one, I'll start with Carrie.
So I think we kind of touched on this just, earlier. The shift right now in technology is just amazing. And so, earlier Daryl mentioned kind of a hosted concept where your technology is consolidated. And the benefit that I see in that is for that fail safe. I'm always, and anyone should always be looking at disaster planning and as Bonnie mentioned, the what if game. And so for some of those alternate where you don't have all your eggs in one basket, that traditional consolidation, we've all moved to one building, our server room is in this building, we may have another agency that is our backup, or we may have our own backup center, but really you put all your eggs in one basket. And, again, just this day and age, you just don't know what could happen, whether it's terrorist attack or natural disasters. So the technology that's out there to be able to do like a geodiverse kind of network design to where you have some flexibility in being able to, it may not just, if you're having to evacuate a building, that doesn't mean 911s don't get answered. It's or it doesn't mean you have to overload your backup agency with all your calls. There's nothing wrong with having that, tactical bag and go and just plug in and start answering 911 calls from a remote location. And there's just so many things that they've designed these days to be able to accommodate any unforeseen situation. And so that's the biggest benefit I see in those kind of a geodiverse environment with hosted networks, to be able to kind of share back and forth, especially if you have states or PSAPs that are willing to kind of, enter into some of these agreements to help each other out. That, it may look like this county wants to consolidate and this county wants to consolidate, and they want to do this together and kind of support each other and have host A, host B type PSAP with cost sharing, but not necessarily everybody being in the same building, still operating the way you want to operate, but just kind of, building that infrastructure a little stronger with the network.
Thank you. Tom or Bonnie, anything to add?
So on this one, I guess one of the biggest benefits from any alternative form is that it can make the ability to improve emergency response outcomes possible for everybody, right? And that if there's funding constraints, if there's some politics getting in the way, if there's, facility constraints, whatever the constraint is, that an alternative form can at least help move the needle. It might not get you to your ideal state, but it could move the needle toward a more positive direction with improvements, efficiencies, and such that maybe you couldn't have before. So, an alternative form can be more palatable to the group to at least get things started.
Thank you, Bonnie. Tom?
Yeah, I totally agree. We would definitely don't have to do big bang. Everybody all of a sudden consolidates into one location. Do a phased approach, crawl, walk, run. Just putting everybody on the same CAD system gets real-time information exchange, right? Good interoperability. You now have some redundancy. And what it forces all the stakeholder departments to do is talk about the workflows, the business processes, codes, common terminology, all those things. And so that really builds a strong foundation. And so if that was just phase one, and that was all the jurisdictions did, there's going to be a tremendous number of benefits from that. But if they get that done and they do a good job with that, they can move to phase two and phase three. So there's definitely good reasons to do it in a phased approach.
Yeah, something I would add too is that I would really encourage PSAP managers and 911 governing bodies to think about consolidation more broadly, because I think what we usually think of is either physical consolidation or technological consolidation, but it can actually mean things that are beyond just those things. Something I think it might have been you, Tom, earlier who mentioned the possibility of consolidating recruitment efforts. Having one job application that can be used by several neighboring public safety answering points, and they share a recruitment pool. This might work better in areas where you have several PSAPs in a fairly small geographic area, so that it makes sense to share that recruitment pool. But that could be of benefit. Another thing that you can share would be training resources. If you're going to have a training academy at a 911 center, and there are neighboring PSAPs that also have training academies, maybe you can do that together and share your classroom training resources as well. And then there's also financial consolidation, not really meaning putting all of your money into one account, but maybe there are certain expenses that you can go in on together with your neighboring jurisdictions and be able to get some economies of scale to get better pricing if you go in together on purchasing equipment or purchasing maintenance agreements or other services. You can get a better deal than you would have be able to get if you were just each purchasing it separately. So thinking about consolidation is more than just answering the 911 calls together or putting everyone in the same building together. I think we need to start thinking more outside the box. So on our last question, before we get to audience questions, what are some of the strategies? This is probably the biggest one, really, one of the biggest hurdles to making some of these plans come to fruition, which is what are some of the strategies that agency leaders can use to help build buy-in for consolidation? And for this one, I'll start with Tom.
First and foremost, opportunities for improvement, everywhere from the performance of the emergency communication center, your call taking operations, dispatch operations, call processing, field operations, the interoperability, information sharing, administration. We've talked about staffing, the technology systems, the quality of those systems. Just doing a very good objective assessment of all of these different areas and say, where are there opportunities for improvement? And by doing that for all the different relevant PSAPs, are you seeing some common things? Are you seeing some areas that together, economies of scale, we can be better if we combine our forces than trying to just be in silos? A good consolidation plan has that as a driver because it's going to show tangible benefits to political leadership, executive leadership, and the community what the return on investment is. We're going to put all this time, money, and effort to consolidate, and here are going to be the tangible benefits. Here's how you're going to be able to measure our performance in the future as compared to the past. So we would say the strategy starts with what are those just tangible opportunities for improvement? Document them, Don't embellish on them, just make them real and factual, and just put it all on paper to use that as part of that starting point for discussions.
Thank you, Tom. Carrie or Bonnie, anything to add?
Carrie, you want to go ahead?
Sure. I think just in addition to that, right now we're in a really good environment as dispatchers being raised to a higher level of standard as professionals across the country. You're seeing this really big shift that, you know, the days of secretaries and, you know, just kind of, oh, you're cute, go back to the dispatch center. They're really being more and more recognized. And I think you can leverage on that as PSAP directors and managers of, you know, kind of, if this is something you're looking to do, is, you know, doing the research, taking the information you're hearing from across the country of things that, you know, is just a big shift. And it's almost like putting the ball in their court. You know, when you do your homework and you have, you know, instead of, I don't ever recommend just, you know, having a meeting and say, we want to consolidate. You know, as Tom mentioned, have your plan, have some data to back it, maybe even take some tours of other consolidated PSAPs, go ask, you know, you have a lot, it sounds like, within your own state of individuals that have been through it. You know, put all this to paper and go with a good plan and to the table and say, this is what we want to do. This is why. Here's, you know, like all the things Tom mentioned, the benefits, return on investment. And again, from a people aspect, because right now that they're listening, I would say across the board. And when I talk to police chiefs and fire chiefs, for a long time, you guys all know it has been this just pulling of, you know, recognize these individuals for what they do. And I don't feel us having to pull anymore. I'm hearing more and more of those. And this is just in the area I'm at. So it may be completely different. And you may be saying, yeah, that's not how it is here. So you may still have to really do some extra work. But, you know, things like what I explain to them, I tell them, do you realize that dispatchers' organs are starting to shut down because they're taking these calls and I give horrible examples of calls that are happening and radio traffic and all that adrenaline's getting dumped into their system and they have no way of releasing it right at that moment unless they get up and exercise. And so where you as a field responder can rush to the scene, you can, you know, get rid of that. I really just try to paint a picture of the environment and then add to that. Now imagine they're doing this by themselves and they're alone, they don't have a team. You know, you can just kind of build on that. And really it's in presentation. You can walk into a room of kind of your county commissioners or your first responders, any stakeholders, and you can shut it down and turn it off, or you can go in and really just present it and in a way that, like I said, puts the ball in their court of you give enough information where how can they, you know, what can they come back with, which I'm sure they can. And you know, a lot of times it's money and control. But again, have an answer to it. So I don't really know if that answered the question, Daryl.
No, I think it did. You know, and I think you make an interesting point with, you know, I don't normally think of or haven't in the past thought of the traumatic stress on telecommunicators as a factor to think about or to talk to people about when considering consolidation. But you know, with a larger staff, you can potentially take somebody off the phone who just had a very traumatic call, or off of the radio who just handled a very traumatic, you know, police foot or car pursuit incident. You know, in a smaller center, the opportunities for that are much less. You know, and that may not be that compelling of a reason for some stakeholders, but you know, if you tell them, you know, if we take better care of our employees, we will have fewer problems with our staffing. That might have more of an impact on their decision making. So I think that's a very good point. Bonnie, anything to add?
So again, everybody's making such, really good points. And when it comes to buy-in, just as I'm sure everybody that's actively in the comm center on this call or has worked in one before, trying to please everybody is, pretty much impossible. So, being realistic is really important when you're trying to establish buy-in, trying to make scenarios based type things that Carrie was talking about. How does this impact the staff, their health, your retention? Where can there be, you may not save money overall initially, but is there, are there hidden cost savings in human resources and personal health and retention? But at the end of the day, when it comes to buy-in, it's also being flexible in your expectations as somebody who is leading a consolidation effort, no matter what it might be, and looking to those alternatives in those creative ways that, again, the goal is to improve emergency response outcomes, not necessarily to try to find that silver bullet. So how can you at least start moving the needle and being flexible in our own minds as we're trying to do that? And and just kind of a reality too is even as consultants, and we have to be this way too, and be realistic that we can follow every every aspect of the perfect project management plan and the perfect implementation plan. And the reality is, in some form of a risk that we have to mitigate, is that you could do everything right and still have a messy consolidation, right? Consolidations can be really messy. And so having that flexibility, being able to, roll with the punches and just be trying to look downstream and see what's next to be able to get there. That is the goal, whatever the goal might be. So we have to have that flexibility, and that can also improve your buy-in because they don't see everything as right straight between two lines. They can see a path forward between the trees, right? And not hit the trees, but see a path downhill to where you want to go.
Thank you, Bonnie. And one thing I would add to that too is that, there will almost always be an adjustment period. And sometimes that adjustment period post consolidation can be really rough. It can be. That doesn't mean that you necessarily made a bad decision in the consolidation. Maybe it means that there are some things that should have been planned out better or prepared for better. But I don't think you're going to avoid it entirely. There will be an adjustment period, and not everybody's going to be happy immediately after it happens, but sometimes those things can be worked through over time. So that was all of the written questions that we had. And I want to thank our panelists, but we're not done yet because I wanted to save 20 minutes at least for audience questions. And here we are with 19 minutes left to go. So I guess I planned it well. Is there anybody from the audience that has a particular question that they would like to ask? And if you do, so I just saw something come up in chat here. So Rachel says the momentum of NG 911 efforts should lead to phased approaches where regional PSAPs are sharing data such as GIS data, workflows, emergency preparedness, alerting protocols, cross-training / education, etc. Meeting other professionals from surrounding PSAPs and sharing data and ideas is inspiring. This itself is one part of consolidation, even if not absolute consolidation. Maybe regional collaboration, which will serve NG 911 preparedness as a more realistic goal than focus on consolidation. And Rachel, I would agree entirely with that. I think, that's one of the things that, we're really looking at hard here in Colorado. The EZINet users group is discussing ways that we can now leverage our EZINet, now that we have an EZINet, to, long-term to provide that sort of collaboration and lean on those technological opportunities. But it goes, like I mentioned earlier, it goes beyond just the technological side, ways that we might be able to collaborate with each other better across the state in terms of training, in terms of sharing policies and other resources. And I would say that the Colorado 911 Resource Center is a long-term example of what we've been doing here in Colorado to help 911 centers collaborate with each other in that way. Does anybody have any questions that they want to pose to the panelists or panelists? Do any of you want to respond to that comment?
I'll respond to it. I think it's, as the comment was, that it's inspiring to meet with other professionals. And, I think that's really important, especially just from a personal perspective. A lot of times from one PSAP to another, it was almost this us versus them concept when having to transfer calls or call for mutual aid and things like that. And it was just kind of this disconnect. And so what I started doing was taking the dispatchers or trainees or tenured, just kind of rotating, let's go on a tour, let's go meet them and see what their challenges are, see what they're up against, why we're feeling they don't ever answer their phone or they don't, they're rude or they're this and that. Once we got to know them, and this is a concept I feel is very important, even with our field responders, when you know what the other side of the radio is going through, it makes you more of a proactive and better customer service. But definitely in that sharing between the other PSAPs around you, because you start to recognize maybe we do things a little different. Maybe I have more or less technology than you. Maybe policies are different. But at the end of the day, we all are the same breed, right? And we do the same job. And so I would always encourage dispatchers from the larger PSAPs, visit the smaller agencies and realize how spoiled you are sometimes. And then I would bring, those dispatchers from smaller agencies without CAD to come in and just to kind of get an idea. This when they are asking you these questions, this is what's going on this side, and just bridging that communication gap between you as PSAPs, from the line level, from the dispatcher level. A lot of times I saw agencies wouldn't do that. COVID kind of put a damper on that, unfortunately, but now that, maybe we can start getting back out there, I think it's a brilliant idea. Now, there's also the caveat too, we're already shorthanded. We don't have time to go, making visits, but it's very important to try to build in that time into a training curriculum or something, just to be able to understand each other a little more and really create that family network.
And that raises a thought for me, which is, and maybe COVID actually shows the need for this more in some ways, because if you've got neighboring PSAPs and you're not consolidating physically or sharing technology, but one of the things you could do for each other is to cross-train your employees. Have your employees sit in at the neighboring PSAP, have their employees sit in at your PSAP and learn how to use your technology, so that if you have a staffing crisis, a short-term staffing crisis or even a longer-term staffing crisis, you have the opportunity to back each other up with personnel. We have a TERT program here in Colorado. I don't know how extensively it's used or available, but neighboring PSAPs can do this with each other. I think probably even a lot more easily, because they have the opportunity, to potentially send their employees over to cross-train with neighboring PSAPs so that they can help each other if that ever becomes an issue. Any other questions? Go ahead, Tom.
Yeah, I was just going to add that that's a great comment that was made, and we always recommend GIS is a great starting point for collaboration amongst all the different city and county jurisdictions. I mean, just from a policy and a consistency of data perspective, does the PSAP already have public safety grade GIS? Are they meeting? You mentioned the ESINet. In your ESINet future, 100% of all address validation is going to be completed based on the accuracy of your GIS information. So NENA has a next gen 911 GIS standards, so it's dynamic, ever growing. And do all the jurisdictions, are they all using the same address processes and formats? Some jurisdictions will say we're all going to use US Post Office or whatever, but getting a common GIS database that everybody can share data. And the other thing too is, especially with fire and EMS, constantly going over from mutual aid and automatic aid into the other locations, that there's a lot of benefits for that. So the comment's great. If you just picked one area and everybody just started collaborating, it really starts some good communication. People start getting to know each other, and it'll start breaking out into other topics.
Very good. Patty West says, perhaps it goes without saying, but coming from an authority that has 4 PSAPs, we have shared one CAD for over 15 years. Having a weekly standing meeting is crucial. We share multiple technologies, and these weekly meetings not only keep everyone in the loop, but we are forced to come to agreement on many items. In any consolidation, the work is never done. That's a terrific point, Patty. Do any of our panelists want to share any thoughts about how to keep that ongoing collaboration working after, post the technical date of consolidation?
So Daryl and Patty, great observation there. And consolidations are like humans, like, right? It goes to stages. So we talked about, Daryl, you mentioned that, there's that period after consolidation, where everybody's just, trying to get to know each other, and, you're living together now, whatever we keep kind of falling toward this, it's got to be physical, and it doesn't. So even in a virtual consolidation or some alternate foreign policy, fiscal, any of these types of consolidation, this ongoing communication is so important. And what it comes down to is commitment to keep it going as the consolidation matures from toddler stage into, juvenile, into a mature stage. And we may tend to, as things get, just like in relationships, sometimes things that we start taking things for granted, and things like that. But there has to be that commitment, that rhythm to maintaining, bidirectional communication, long term over the life. It's not a finite game here when it comes to 911, right? It's an infinite game, if you will. If you think about game theory, the idea is to get better and better at serving our community, better and better at improving emergency response outcomes, year after year, call to call, and that takes commitment to the long term.
Thank you, Bonnie. One thing I think I would add is that the ongoing communication isn't just limited to the 911 centers and the 911 managers, or even the frontline personnel in the PSAPs. It's also for the client agencies, the agencies that you're dispatching for, because some of your agencies may think, well, this is working great for us, and then other agencies are going, I'm not real happy with how this has turned out, or the service that we're getting now. And if they don't, one thing we know in public safety is that you usually don't have to prompt people to tell you if they have a problem. But having a forum where those types of things can be discussed and aired out, and that solutions can be found, instead of letting them fester or making them think that they don't have a forum for solving those issues, I think that can go a long way towards making sure that post-consolidation you don't run into additional issues. And Tom, I saw you came off mute. Do you have something to add?
Yeah, just it's great. It's a great comment. The constant communication should be a formal part of the governance agreement. It should be in the charter, the bylaws, the committees should be mandatory. There must be X number of meetings of the technology committee, the operations committee, management oversight committee every 2 weeks. Have a template. Are there any problems? Are there, talk about, what's good, what, typical SWOT, what are the strengths, what are the weaknesses, what are the opportunities? It should not be optional. It should absolutely be part of the formal agreement, so nothing can slip through the cracks. And also somebody can't say, well, we've had this problem for a month. Well, okay, here's the structure. If you have an immediate problem, here's how you notify us immediately. If it can wait for our biweekly meeting, bring it up then. But all that should be formalized.
Very good points. Any other comments or questions for our panelists? And you don't have to send it in chat. If you want to just come off mute, you can air it verbally.
Yeah, Daryl, thanks. This is Robert Sanchez, CDOT Traffic Operations. A question I kind of have, and maybe looking at experiences, both good and bad, when you're looking at the integration of personnel, the different, conflicts that just are naturally occurring, not to be demeaning, but to paint the picture in my own head, when you have a fish tank and you bring a new fish into it, you kind of leave them in the bag or the cup so they can get used to their environment and acclimate. Have you seen or heard of any instances of that, of, sending folks from one center to the other, in the lead up and build up to the actual integration, to let them see and learn and acclimate to each other? I'm sure it could work either way, how that goes, but just curious if you know of any experiences or instances like that.
I'd like to comment to that one because that was such a huge topic during our consolidation, not as a consultant, but coming from the PSAP, is, I wasn't there in the initial consolidation. I started working there some years after the consolidation had happened. It was still transitioning of, kind of getting used to things. However, I did a lot of asking because I'm nosy and I just wanted the history. I wanted to know everything. And, talking to our community, it was more the responders and the counties and the cities. They were more on board with it, and everyone, yes, I always said I wanted to be a fly on the wall. I would have loved to have been a fly on the wall to hear how they came up with one set of policies and procedures and operations. But what I hear is that was more smooth than bringing the dispatchers together. And it goes back to that, we had dispatchers from a fire department that had worked for a smaller agency, fire department for almost 20 years. And now you want me to go where? And you want me to learn what? And, trying to bring them all. And that's really where kind of the hangups came, was pulling all of them together to work with each other and to learn a new skill. And so from my understanding, there was that transition phase of allowing, bringing kind of phasing it out, bringing one entity at a time in, and allowing the others, as much as they wanted, go ownership, even to decoration. How do you want it to be decorated? How do you want the positions? Bringing them all into an empty building or even in the blueprints, and say, what would you like to see? And just kind of giving some ownership so that when that does happen, it's a little less of an impact, but there still will be. And, I always tease them because predominantly at that time it was women. And so most of them have all retired by now, but I used to give them a hard time. I'm like, you ladies just couldn't get along, could you? Just laughing. And what they would tell me is the first year was pretty rough, but after that, they kind of just laughed their way through it, and they became a very strong unit and carried that center until retirement and have the war stories to tell. And we're very, very proud of it. So during the storm, they were, they had a strong foundation, and their trees were kind of flying everywhere up top, just trying to get through it. But they had a sense of pride that was really interesting to see and to hear the stories. And so I would just come with the concept of, this is not for me as your manager, this is yours. How do you want it to be designed? And just kind of let them brainstorm and imagine and give some buy-in.
That's great, Carrie. Thank you. Bonnie?
Yeah, I think that after that, Robert, it does happen, right? That, you can kind of bring everybody together, and I'm going to assume that that's what you're talking about. This is a physical consolidation at this point. There is that time of transition. It is about culture, and sometimes you're mixing cultures of your 2 or 3 PSAPs coming together. One environment, one entity could have had a very positive culture, another one may have been a very toxic culture, and how do you then bring that together? And it does come down to, I think, in some sense, again, there's no silver bullet, but leadership, and that leadership expectation that we're going to have a culture here of helping one another, not criticizing and demeaning each other, leading that by example as well. I've seen instances where the leadership itself did not want the consolidation. So, that permeated down through to the staff. And
So it really, in my opinion, we're gonna start at the leadership, promoting a culture of helping one another. We're all in this together. As Carrie said too, if there is that opportunity to develop the room, the operational floor, what does that look like? But you know, again, we're there to help each other, not break each other down.
Yep. Thank you, Bonnie. And thinking about Robert's question, what I've seen it done different ways where people, the agencies that are consolidating try to get everything taken care of before day one, so that when they do consolidate, they hit the ground running and everybody's able to do everybody else's job. And that's a lot to take on day one. So, to Robert's point of, is there a way to acclimatize people into it? I think a lot of centers do it the other way where, okay, we're going to, on day one, we're all going to be in the same building, but you're not all going to be doing each other's jobs. We'll do the cross training later. And that gives you a little bit of for the personnel, it gives you a little bit of a breathing room saying, okay, I know how to do my job. I'll just be in a different building. That's not a big deal. I can handle that. And then later you do the cross training where they actually start to learn each other's jobs. So it gives you a little bit more of a comfort zone, I think. So that may be one thing to think about.
Yeah, Daryl, what you said there, I think is outstanding, that perspective, because when they see each other doing their jobs, they can gain the appreciation of, oh, wow, they're pretty good at that. And, vice versa, both sides of it. So, I think that's a good perspective. And also what Carrie had mentioned on the, kind of the shared tasks, a decorating committee or what have you, when you integrate them like that, they're already succeeding on a task together. They're building that teamwork and that trust. So, when they have those levels of success, and then once they integrate and they're doing the job together, they're just building on a solid foundation. So thank you for that perspective.
Yep, and Bonnie mentioned the word culture, and I think that's a very important word to remember, because you're not consolidating just people or technology or buildings. You're consolidating the cultures of these different working groups who, they have a long history together. They've got a lot of personalities that may mesh well or may not mesh well. They may be coming into a situation where they don't know all of the back history. And Carrie kind of alluded to this too, that can create a lot of, personality issues that come up right at first, but that hopefully over time they're able to work through those because of their common goals. And with that, we are at 1:31 p.m., so we're out of time, but I think this was a terrific discussion. I want to thank our panelists for joining us today. Tom and Carrie and Bonnie, thank you all very much.
Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Appreciate
And
it very much.
I'm assuming this would be fine. I'm sure not only would it be fine, it'd be greatly appreciated, since you all work for firms that do this for a living, if I send your contact information out to all of our attendees today. Yeah, I think this was great. We probably could have talked for another couple hours. It's a big topic. So thanks everybody for joining, and take care and have a good rest of your week.